There's a bit of concern about the way this is being received, not just at home, but also by our allies abroad. The sharing of war plans on the Signal app inadvertently to a journalist. We saw some pretty tough testimony today on Capitol Hill with the two top intelligence officials in this administration, Tulsi Gabbard, CIA Director Ratcliffe, suggesting that classified information was not shared on this app. How do we say that with a straight face?
So I'm glad I wasn't the one in the position of having to say it. Judging from my past experience as a staffer or senior staffer at the National Security Council, I would say that the only way you can interpret that last statement as accurate is if the Secretary of Defense, I think they're pointing at this, for example, on his own, unilaterally declassified information. Okay. For example, information about war planning. He would have had to have moved that information from the high side, the classified side, to what is an unclassified system, Signal, whether encrypted or not. So somehow they may be interpreting that in the process of doing that, that should be read as a de facto declassification.
Would that be borne out in an audit?
It would be if there is that kind of thorough audit. I think some on the Hill want it. It's not clear that others do. I've got to say I was surprised with Chairman Tom Cotton, who is by any measure a war hawk and someone who I'm sure is very careful himself about security operations. I was surprised at his unwillingness to lean into those questions.
Well, we certainly saw the leaning in on the behalf of others, Democratic senators, specifically on this. And I wonder, as we consider the troubling nature of a number of factors of this story, is it so much about the way in which these officials were communicating with each other, or what it may signal in terms of not just internal U.S. government intelligence sharing, but external intelligence sharing with partners who may not want their classified information transmitted through means such as Signal?
Sure. I think it's in all of the above. So certainly what they were communicating was a huge problem. How they were communicating it was a huge problem. And then I would go further to say, in the context of what they were communicating, they showed they have a very different view of who our friends and partners and allies are than is commonly understood. It differs from the history of the United States in terms of the importance of our relationship with Europe, of Canada, of Australia, of those who are in the Five Eyes Agreement, which is not Russia and not China. And yet, in the kinds of language they use and how they talk about things and in what they're doing on these essentially open systems. Signal is encrypted, but it's an open source means of communicating. They're showing an utter disregard for those for whom the United States has traditionally, and I would argue needs to rely in the future. Partnerships are partnerships for a reason.
We got a statement from the White House earlier today. It doesn't mention Signal, but refers to a coordinated effort to distract from the successful actions taken by President Trump and his administration to make America's enemies pay and keep Americans safe. Refers to the Biden administration sitting back as a band of pirates exacted a toll system in one of the most important shipping lanes in the world. Does that give you a sense of how the White House is going to handle this? It doesn't sound like anyone's getting fired.
It gives me a sense of a lack of appreciation, maybe willful lack of appreciation for the seriousness of the situation. It also, I have to say, I did not serve in the Biden administration, but I was an acute observer from the outside. And it's a serious allegations and quite unfair allegations about what the Biden administration did or didn't do with respect to the Houthis. They certainly took a number of actions. You can disagree with the intensity of their actions, but using that kind of language is as problematic as using the language that was reported to be on the Signal chat about European allies.